as Kyle leaves. Hey there. If you're watching live, just wanted to get some leaders together and do some panel questions. This is my third time going live. So, if you're watching, there might be some little bit of stumbling blocks on my part, but, the error is human. So wanted to introduce myself. I'm Dawn Harrington. I have a blog, techtipsgirl.com. I'm an Alteryx innovator as well as a Tableau social ambassador. And then I'm going to turn it over to Pat if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Pat Moore. I am one of the data and analytics leads in finance at JP Morgan, and I am doing my very first podcast. Pumped to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Dawn.
All right. Raphael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Raphael. First podcast as well, so kind of a newbie as well, like Pat, and really glad to be here.
Sorry, I got a message that it wouldn't allow me to stream to Twitter like it used to before. So we're just streaming live to LinkedIn and my YouTube channel. So those are the only ones that matter. So it's fine.
Twitter not anymore, right?
Twitter X, I have to have a premium account. So Kyle, sorry to interrupt. I will let you introduce yourself now.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Dawn. My name is Kyle Massey. I am a business intelligence automation lead / software engineer at JPMC, and I am a Tableau data dev ambassador as well.
Awesome.
And it is not my first podcast. I will throw that out there.
Have an experienced podcaster. No. I also want to call out both Kyle and Raphael have their own blogs, blog channels, blog posts, blog sites. There we go. Don will get the word out. So Kyle's is kylemassey.com and Raphael is Ralph's World. And what made you think of Ralph's World, Raphael?
Ralph's Data World, actually. I guess that was something I wanted to talk a little bit more about Tableau, but then I had other interests that, kind of sprawled beyond that. So then primarily it was more of just searching for the right domain that made sense for me. And I was doing a bunch of stuff. And then my daughter was the one that just said, hey, just call it Ralph's Data World. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. And then, yeah, it clicked. It made sense.
Sorry, Ralph's Data World. I kept thinking of like the movie, like Ralph's World from like Disney. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was saying. Anyway, so the goal of these sessions is just, to talk about, what it takes to be like a data leader. We're going to ask some panel questions, and each leader is going to go around. So, okay. So one of the first ones that I'm going to ask is about teamwork and collaboration. So we work at a big company, what do you do if you find out another team is doing something similar to your team? How do you partner with them? How do you allocate resources? That kind of thing. So I'm going to go with Kyle first for this question.
Sure. Yeah, so it's kind of unique. The situation at JPMC is kind of unique in that most folks who would want to do something that my team would be doing in terms of automation, using the APIs and things like that, are not going to have the access that they need, nor would we usually give it to them. However, there are some teams that come along and say, like, we know about this API or we have this use case, we want to automate something on our end, whatever the case is, right? Oftentimes what we'll try to do with them is, meet, talk about what they're trying to accomplish and decide whether or not it makes sense for us to take on that work, so that we can provide the same solution for multiple people. So one example I can think of is there was a team that wanted to do like, ad hoc subscriptions with images and things like that. Not something we can give them the access to do in production, but we decided our own internal API, that would be a good feature that other folks might want to use. So it's more about, when it comes to the automation side of things, it's more about finding where that overlap is. If it's something where it's like, this is really only something your team is going to want, then, have at it. If it's something that is a little bit more, can be scaled or used across like different disciplines, line of business, whichever, then my team will typically play more of a hand in making that happen.
Okay, cool. And you guys are very generic with your answers. You don't have to get into specifics. Okay, Pat, would you like to go next?
Sure.
What would you do if you found another team doing similar things to what your team is doing?
I mean, you're always going to find somebody that's doing something similar, right? The place is ginormous. I think that it becomes a resource allocation question first and foremost, right? And then prioritization discussion is like how we typically handle this. And what I like to think about during, that initial conversation is really this balancing act between standardizing and customizing. So at the end of the day, you're going to have processes or business needs, right, for, a multitude of reasons, right? Customers, regions, right, et cetera. The view of that data, right, the output of that data, right, it could be very specific, right? So like, I like Kyle's, analogy about like the overlap. However you get that data and you prepare it, right, often that's like where the overlap is. So, you resource align, right, you spend some time where you need to have that standard approach, right, where you shouldn't be duplicating efforts, right? And then at some point you should branch, right? And you should solve your own business problem, right? I think that aligning, resources to do the bulk of the work, right? And then, you kind of diverge where it needs to is what we found is most successful.
Cool. Thanks. Raphael, you're up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, to echo Pat's point, kind of resources is a big deal for me and my team, but also sometimes take into consideration, interest in within my team. If someone reaches out within my team and says, "Hey, I have a really big interest in machine learning," and maybe that's something that we're not currently doing at the moment, but if there's another team that's employing that type of analytic functionality, and I want them to kind of develop and learn on their own, then that's something that I try to kind of, support. So, kind of looking at resources, interests of my team, and then primarily, trying to get in the forefront of some new cool things that are happening. If I can get on the forefront of that and kind of be along that journey, and, kind of feel the same pain points that the major group is feeling, then I think in the long run, it works out for us as a team that, we kind of establish that collaborative partnership with that team.
Cool. So the second topic I would kind of want to talk about is higher up pressures. So how would you deal with pressure from above? So, like if you need to say no to upper management, what advice would you give to other managers on that topic? So I'm going to change things around a little bit. Raphael, I'm going to ask you first.
Okay. So one of the few things that I've learned through some of my past years in leading folks, but also in my readings and whatnot, is, you're kind of the main, I guess you're like the captain of your team, right? You want to make sure that everybody's plates are easily manageable. A lot of times, folks, I've noticed when their plates get full, a lot of them won't tell you, primarily because they don't want to seem that they're not handling the workload. They don't want to seem that maybe there's an issue with how they're dealing with, their plates. So one of the few things that I've tried to kind of pride myself on is being able to be confident to lead your team, but also being able to have the humility to follow when needed. And one of the things that I've told my folks is, if your plates get full, be transparent, be honest with me, let me know what's going on. And then I will take the brunt of that. I'll have those tough conversations with folks above me and, kind of try to find a compromise. Most of the time it's a lot of, what's your expectation from my team? What is it that you need? How can we prioritize that? And if I need to, kind of roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty and, play that individual contributor as well, then that's something that I'll do on my end as well.
Awesome. Kyle?
Yeah, I love that Raphael used the word compromise, because one of the big things, like it's true. It's true for us internally. It's true everywhere right now. Like people just aren't hiring a lot of people. And if you talk across tech and data, one of the biggest complaints you're going to hear is I just don't have enough resources. I don't have enough bodies to do everything that, my leadership may want me to try to accomplish. So I have become really good at the compromise frame of mind. And really what I mean there is if we have a roadmap that we've established, at the beginning of the year, and now all of a sudden, priorities are changing, people want to slide something else in because, so-and-so said that's the big cool thing, then my immediate response needs to be, okay, then what are you fine with coming later than what we originally planned? What, if you want something net new and you can't give me new people, then we have to compromise here. And, for the most part, our senior leadership luckily is pretty receptive to that. They understand that we are a finite number of people, a small team. But I think that's really, really important because otherwise you train your senior leadership that if they ask you to do something and you do it on a dime, then that means they'll just keep coming and keep asking for more. And that it leads to frustration with my employees, with myself. We end up working super late nights to accomplish things that maybe we even question whether they're worth it. So it's just like, again, to Raphael's point about the compromise and also the transparency, being brave and honest and just saying like, that's not going to happen. Or if you really want that to happen, then something else has to suffer or, be put aside. It's not always easy to say those to your senior leadership, but in my view, it's better to be upfront about it like that instead of failing to meet your goals, driving yourself crazy, having people quit because it's just too much. I think that's pretty much my take on it.
Pat, do you agree?
Yeah. No, those are both good points. Right, shameless plug for a book that I read many years ago that my old manager prescribed to me, probably because he was a GE guy and Jack Welch wrote a portion of this forward or whatever. But it's a really good book. It's called Managing Up. Right, it's all about how you deal with your manager, your manager's manager. Right, how you survive the office and the climb as you start your career or even the middle of your career. But it's really good. From a day-to-day perspective, right? I think that what Kyle just focused on is absolutely right. Not that Raph's not either, but Kyle's point about the compromise, right, is all a prioritization conversation, right? The thing that I would say is that all of your leaders, anybody that's above you was in your shoes at one point, right? And everybody's really reasonable. Like if you come to them and you say, here's this, and then this happened, and then we need to make a decision about A or B, like everyone is happy to compromise. It's when you're not communicative, right? It's when you're not identifying issues, you're not escalating. Like that's where you see problems, right? And noise that bottles up. So having that dialogue about being up, right? Not being afraid of, the people that are above you. Like if you take that approach that everybody was in your shoes at one point, right? And know that everybody's approachable, right? And then you act as an approachable leader when you get to that point, it just makes everything much easier.
And would you say that this is kind of also falls in the line with advice for new managers, like how to handle the higher up pressures? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, being a new manager is tough. Like it's work, right? And like I don't think that that's properly communicated to some people up front, right? You just say like, oh, hey, you're going to manage a team. Like there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, right? Like you're helping that person on their own career journey. You have to have a lot of time and attention that's dedicated to that, right? In addition to whatever your BAU is, right? So like, just like Raph was saying, where, you're carving out time to actually help them like accomplish tasks and do business deliverables. Now you actually have to carve out time, to help them grow and mature and coach them. And, it's a lot of work. So, my only advice to somebody that's just getting into that is, know that it's a lot of work, but know that there's a lot of resources out there. Like everybody's gone through this journey in a multitude of industries, right? Functions, everything else. We have a bunch of good internal training programs that, prep you for it, right? And then the continuous learning, like it never stops. So just, I think COVID had a big impact on how people view their work, right? And now, you as a manager have to, respond to, how people are looking at work a little differently than we did 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I can add to that. I would probably say I've been managing now for a little over 3 years. And one of the things that I learned immediately is you have to be willing to accept uncertainty. Everything's not going to be laid out for you. You'd have to, be willing to kind of be that navigational lens for your team and just, be at the onset that, you know, be comfortable making a decision. And even if it's an uncertain decision, I'd rather make an uncertain decision than not make a decision at all. And that's one thing that I've learned, uh, pretty swiftly where I'm at now. And since Pat gave a plug on a book, I'm going to give one too. There's one that I recently read about a year ago. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. F being, being spelled out. It's by Mark Manson. It's a really good book. One of the things that I read in that book was, being confident and knowing that you are going to fail. There are going to be some things that occur, and if you understand that failure just comes with success, then you're willing to make those, spur decisions or uneducated decisions or uncertain decisions. And sometimes you'll realize that it's just a means towards an end of success. Roadmaps, to Kyle's point, is a good point to make. To manage projects, but sometimes roadmaps are meant to be broken, and you got to be willing to be nimble to pivot. And it kind of reminds me of that James Franco meme where he kind of has that noose on. It's like first time. Like that's kind of how I feel sometimes. Where you're like you have all these things coming at you, and you just kind of want to crawl in a hole. But I'd rather take the brunt of all that uncertainty and take that for my team and allow them to work and feel comfortable. And I think that's kind of where I'm at right now, where I'm actually starting to feel comfortable having those uncertain conversations, uncertain kind of meetings. And it's okay to be honest. It's okay to be transparent and say, if you're in a meeting, say, what's this about again? Or what are we talking about? Because I want to be sure that I have the right information to get back to my team. I'd rather be the person that, would raise his hand up and say, what are we talking about again? Just because I want to make sure I get the right information to my team down.
Yeah,
you made me. Oh, I'm sorry, Kyle. You made me think of a video that I just saw that said "No agenda, no attenda." So it's always happening to a meeting. So, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, no problem. I was just gonna actually, both Pat and Raph basically stole my thoughts straight out of my head there. But just to kind of piggyback off of, like, I think a lot of people in general, right, adult human beings, are afraid to speak up in a professional environment with the words "I don't know," or like "I'm lost," "I need help." Like those are difficult for people to say just in general, but especially as a manager. To Raph's point, like raising your hand and being like, "I'm lost," in the moment is so much better than pretending you know what's going on, and then you're spinning your wheel, wasting time, you're giving your team the wrong direction. So like, and right now I lead a team of like really senior software developers, and I also have 3 college interns. So like the maturity experience continuum on my team right now is very wider than it's ever been. And I keep coaching my interns, like, if you don't know or if you're lost, tell me now. Don't wait until the end. Don't wait until tomorrow. Let's squash this now. And I think that applies from the day you start your first job, if you become a manager or whichever, just being able and learning how to ask for help the right way. Don, we deal with a lot of like a ticketing situation where it's just like, how did you never learn to effectively ask for help? I think that's a really important skill when you're leading people, is to their point, like raise your hand and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, or what we're talking about. I need help, whatever the case might be.
All great advice. So dealing with the topic of new emerging technology, how do you ensure that your team stays up to date? Because we know there's lot of stuff out there in the internet world talking about, oh, AI with data and analytics. So how do you stay on top? I'm going to go with Pat this time. If you want to go ahead.
I have a slightly pessimistic view on this, right? Probably just from being here as long as I have been and knowing that things go through a lot of controls and a lot of reviews and a lot of, due diligence as it should, right? But the people that are on my team, it's all almost academic, right? Because like we know that it's going to be years until it's like really in your hands, in a work setting for where we are, and like that's fine, right? So there's enough places I think to go play with this outside of your day-to-day job. Stuff like this is like one of my favorite interview questions, right? It's just like outside of like Stack Overflow, like where do you find answers to stuff, right? Like Reddit is unbelievably popular for like tech help, right? And like you would like never know that, right? But like our data is beautiful is like amazing, right? So like there's all kinds of things where you can like go find new technologies like this, right? Or information about it, right? Medium's like another good one where I read a bunch of those like blog posts to like keep up on it. But I would say that right back to like the manager comment like from before, I'm not in the camp that it's like, your job as a manager to like keep everybody up to date. And that's like my pessimistic view, right? Like you're here to accomplish a task, right? You work with the tools that you're given, right? And if you want to explore those cool new technologies, right? Like we'll try to find opportunities, but even though they might be few and far between for like, how they actually apply to your day-to-day job. But like I always encourage people to just go do that, through some of these other mechanisms. Right? You got to find it interesting. If you don't find it interesting, right, and you're not kind of personally motivated for it, you're never going to learn. And that's true about anything. Is like how I look at it. So slightly different, right? I don't really think that I got to keep enough people up to date, right? If you're interested in it, you're going to keep yourself up to date. But it is always nice to like geek out with somebody and like talk shop about some of those new things and then figure out when they'll be in our hands here.
Raphael?
I try to schedule, like I try to meet with my team, and especially in the beginning of the year, and schedule some time like throughout the month hourly. I want them to dedicate some hours throughout the month in developing themselves. So I have a frank conversation with them, kind of see what they're interested in, see where they see their development going. I know they can do Tableau, I know they can do Alteryx, Python, but then I try to say, hey, pick something that you have an interest in, you want to learn more about, and pick something that can make your job a hell of a lot easier. So I try to see if they can find something that interests them. A lot of times they're gonna run with it, and they'll come back with a list of great things to do, and I try to make sure that they stick to their hours a month and try to develop themselves. The one few times that I've encountered is they'll come back with a list, and I'm not really sure, I'm not really interested in this. So a lot of those times I'll just kind of work a lot more closely with them, and getting more involved. But usually, to Pat's point, I try to just make sure, given our book of work, where do I see it going, and what can be done to make our job easier, and hopefully not in the interim, but in the next year or two. But yeah, I guess that's what I do. Yeah.
Kyle?
Similar to Pat's response. My team comes from, we were traditionally software development team for Tableau. We've kind of transitioned now into all of the other tools that align to us within the bank. So to Pat's point, sometimes it's difficult to go out and say like, you should be interested in this, you keep up to date on this. But I do have, so like some of the members of my team just sort of are naturally more interested in things like AI and the latest and greatest in Tableau and other things like that. So to the best of my ability, I try to like hone in and find what folks are interested in, and encourage them, like, if you have some extra time in our sprint, which, well, that never happens. We used to do as a line of business, we used to have like a learning day every quarter where, the intention was to clear your schedule that day, learn something. It could be, get better at something you do for work, learn about something brand new. realistically, those are really hard to manage. I would like to reintroduce something like that maybe for my team, and maybe it's more of a half day and it's not everybody on the same day. So it, that's really where it gets tricky. But to the points that were made, just kind of listening in, because that's a huge part of being a manager anyway, is listening to the things that your team is saying or not saying, and trying to kind of help them on their own natural journey with some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Because like it's different than new technologies and being new to someone, right? So like there's a bunch of tools that exist that are at the firm that you can go use that maybe you have no experience with, that like fine, right? You can take it as a new learning opportunity, right? But whenever somebody, I took Don's question as more bleeding edge, like, oh, I want a chatbot that is LLM and it just gives me answers to everything. It's like, yeah, okay, like, well, I don't think that we should be building that right now because I don't really know what we would even, how we would even start going about that. So maybe we should stick here with like the approved tool set for now, and you can learn something new, right? New for you, but maybe not as new industry wide. But that's also like a great thing from a manager perspective, to encourage growth. You don't want somebody to feel pigeonholed because they're good at something, right? Or because that's their job. So like encouraging that cross-pollination is like always a big thing, but you got to balance that with a realistic or pessimistic, in my thing, view of, what tools are available and what you should be working on to like solve your problems. And a lot of the times, whatever you're reading about in the news is not going to be materially impactful for a little bit here.
Would you agree that we learn more from mistakes than we do success? Like, have you heard that phrase before? Yeah.
I would agree. And mostly just because, a lot of times in the busy world that we all live in, if something goes well, you just kind of move on, right? Like a lot of times we don't, and we probably should do ourselves more favors and retro on things that went well. But typically the focus of that type of conversation is, here's what we didn't meet, here's what didn't work, etc. So like, yeah, I fully believe that like some of the biggest like aha moments we've had as a team, or even my own work, has been because, oh, I didn't know I could screw it up that way, or I didn't know that if I made this mistake that this was gonna happen, and you just repeat and you don't make the same mistakes again. As long as you don't make this, and I say this to my team too, it's like, as long as you don't make the same mistake over and over again and you learn from it, that's what they're for, right? So yeah, I definitely think that's the case.
Yeah, and like if you do something right perfectly the first time, doesn't that mean that you know how to do it? Like, so, like inherently. So like right? If I can go out and I can code something and it works first try, which like never ever happens, like that means that I got it now, right? But like if I can't, then like you inherently have learned something. So yes, I would think that you only learn from mistakes, right? Or you have learned enough to not make mistakes.
Right.
One of the things that we do as a group, my team's part of a larger group, is we'll have just kind of touch points, and we'll come back and we'll have someone kind of demo like a project or a mistake that's been done and how we learned from it and what are some of the things that came out of that situation. And one of the things that we try to do is we make sure that it's an open environment. There's no double guessing. It's just, here's what happened, here's how we fixed it, and here's the plan for the future. So that's kind of one of the things that we do, and I think it's beneficial. It takes a much more cohesive team or group to allow that to happen, because sometimes if you do it as the group gets larger, then you start having a lot of folks kind of chime in here and there. But that's kind of one of the things that we do as a group.
Cool. So hiring. We all said that we're having a hiring freeze, but do you all have a hiring strategy? Like, do you hire for the tool or do you hire for the space? And this is from a note from a previous, before our podcast conversation. So who would like to go first on their hiring strategy? Okay.
Yeah, I can go first. I would say it depends. It depends on your current book of work, your current resources. I recently just went through that kind of journey from a hiring perspective, and I kind of went at it blind. I had a lot of great candidates that were great for the tool, great for the space. I took into consideration having them have conversations with folks in our group that are more seasoned. So kind of seeing the aspects or the probability that they would gel correctly with the group. I think from a tool perspective, if given the right opportunity, I think if they're motivated enough, they're going to learn the tool, and they're going to learn it pretty well. If they have the right data foundation skills, I think learning Alteryx and Tableau to a point where I can have them valuable to the group is not a problem. One of the things that I found beneficial is, looking at other kind of skills, not just a tool. Are they internal candidate? Do they have some, high-end firm skills or firm foundations that I can easily plug them in to add value? Or are they coming from another kind of employer where they have skills that are going to be beneficial coming in the future? And, or do they already know something like Python or other types of visualization tools that can be easily rinsed and repeat and translated into Tableau and Alteryx? So, looking at those little things here and there. But, lately I found that, kind of just leaving it open, and immediately on interviews, I tell them, hey, this is informal, nothing formal about this. Let's just talk about your experience, what you know about tools, and I want you to drive the meeting and what you want to tell me about yourself. And I found that has been a really good kind of, method in trying to learn more about them beyond what they know about in the tools.
Thank you. Pat, would you like to go?
Yeah. So like on the strategy side of this, right, I'm trying to think like which part of this to start with first, because like Raph brought up like a bunch of very good points, right? You have to think about your team in the org, right? But you have to think about it both from a mesh perspective, right? Like, do you think that this person's gonna fit well, or are they gonna create noise, right? Or are they, gonna enjoy their time working here also? Or are people gonna collaborate with them? There's all kinds of, interpersonal things that, you kind of look for. But the piece on the tooling, like, I don't know if I would ever distinctly hire for a tool, right? And I think that's kind of like what Raph was getting at, where it's like, if you know one thing and you have the understanding of what it's doing, like the tool is just, wherever you're doing the work, right? So like you can do ETL a number of ways. You can do, data visualization, like with a number of tools, right? And if you found somebody from, a different company that used one of the other big vendors or something else, like fundamentally they understand how data needs to be structured and how data needs to move. And, the pieces are, the Lego blocks they have to snap together and what the order is. Like they understand that piece. So that I think is more important than the tool specifically, right? Not to mention that the tech space is changing so fast that or tool you're looking for like could be out of business in no time, right? Or bought up or, whatever. So like, I don't think I would ever hire for the tool. The only other thing that I would encourage anybody listening to this to do also is the filtering that I think happens up front is unfair, right? So like I think that people in the data and analytics space, right, or broadly, right, you get this pre-screening, and like some of the best people that I have had have, they're not of traditional, tech backgrounds, right? Or they're not finance people, right? But like they just have a good attitude. They want to pivot industries, right? Or they were in marketing. One of our guys was in telecommunications. Like you wouldn't think that that's somebody that would, do well, but you should give everybody an opportunity, to prove themselves, right? It's amazing like what happens when, people just get a chance.
I agree. The filtering is not fair, because most of the time when we're looking at, when new people are looking at positions, is that they're dealing with a bot that's looking for keywords and, screening people that way. And it's not picking up on those personable skills that people have. So Kyle, I know what would you like to say?
Yeah, sure. So I think that I agree with, especially with what Pat Pat said, so I've had to hire a contractor before that had to do something very specific. So obviously in that scenario, I am hiring for the tool or for a very specific competency. But when it comes to like hiring like a full-time member of my team, I really focus on soft skills. Like I want to be impressed by how someone communicates in the interview and how they carry themselves and just their general attitude towards themselves, even. I guess I'll say it that way. And I'll give the example that I had when I was hiring for a software engineer a couple of years ago is on paper, one of these candidates was everything we needed, but he was very full of himself. And that was obvious, like right away. And so to me, I would much rather take a chance on someone who might be a little greener, but who I feel like has the right attitude, is going to be a much better fit for the team. Like I would much rather train someone up on hard skills, technical skills, than hope and pray that we're going to be able to change an adult's soft skills. People can improve on soft skills, but for the most part, we are who we are by the time we're in this far into our careers. So I try to take as much of a human approach as possible. Like, do I really want to work with this person every day? Like, yes, you have to have some qualifying skills. Obviously, I can't just hire my best friend off the street to come do software development because she doesn't know anything about it. But I would, I worry about the fit of a team. Is this person going to take feedback? Are they going to be willing to share what they know with the other people on my team? Or so that happens in tech too. Some people know a lot and kind of keep that as their own private treasure chest, and that doesn't help anybody either.
One more on the soft skills things that Kyle mentioned. One of the things that I've noticed when I've interviewed candidates is, if they feel comfortable driving that conversation, then I feel comfortable knowing that if they were on my team, that I can have them meet with an exec director or a managing director, or, at least kind of, round up, collect expectations and get back to the team, but if it's just me and them and they don't feel comfortable, then I start to gauge where is the interest in the position, or, why aren't you able to kind of, talk about yourself? Because a lot of times everybody loves to talk about themselves. I love to talk about myself, so as a candidate, if you don't feel comfortable in, talking about your accolades or your experience, then sometimes from an interviewer standpoint, I tend to kind of push them aside, and the ones that stand out to me are the ones that really drive the conversation, really kind of, talk about what they've done, talk about their accolades, ask a lot of key questions. And, those are the types of folks that I kind of want to talk to. And those are the ones that I would feel comfortable, leading a meeting or, talking to an MD or ED without my presence.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope from what Kyle said, though, with regards to like, you're spending a lot of time with this person, right? Potentially. Like we all work, a lot. It's a key part of, most of your adult life. So I think that the inherent bias is to sit here and try to hire, people like Kyle just said, where you're like, oh, like, am I going to enjoy like hanging out with this person? Right. And like that has some intrinsic bias to it. Right. So like training yourself as an interviewer to be like, okay, like we're at work, right? What do I actually need to get done? Right. And then like Raph was saying, like, I need to be able to trust you from, a delivery standpoint. Right. And like, fine, maybe we're not going to be best friends after this, but like, that's not the task. Right. Like it's a byproduct. That's fun when that happens. But like, training yourself to get out of that bias, I think, is like one of the key things as you're trying to interview and like build that team that really is going to mesh together really well.
You're making me think of a post I just found where it talked about hiring the different kinds of workers, like doers, thinkers, feelers, and I forget the fourth kind, but there's a need for different kinds of workers. So you're hitting right on that point that, sometimes it's best to not hire the people that, it's good to hire somebody maybe the opposite of like your own personality, because they have their own skills and, positives. So the next question is how would you measure success for your data projects? So I'm going to ask each of you think about that question. Kyle, you haven't gone first in a while. So how would you measure success for data projects?
So I'll answer that a little differently probably than Pat and Raf will, just because my team doesn't focus so much on data as much as software engineering and automation. I think the way we would measure our success, the way we've measured our success in the past, is more about enablement. What are we enabling our users to do that they either couldn't do on their own, or that would have been a very long, drawn out manual process. So like the reduction in turnaround time for, let's say, standing up a project or getting something into production is really the only way we've been able to scale the way that we have at Tableau, with Tableau at JPMC. So I think my team, we measure our success in time saved, enabling features that otherwise users wouldn't be able to use because of controls concerns, things like that, and then making sure that we respond. So like, everything is cloud now, right? So and because of the concerns, some of the controls concerns, with related to cloud, we had to use a specific approach internally to making those types of connections. Well, that was a sort of a new thing as of the last couple of years, and it needed to be automated quickly in order to, allow the progression to things like Redshift, Snowflake, all of the big names in the cloud space. So I think I would just sum it up by saying my team's success, I feel my team is successful by allowing people who are in the trenches, so to speak, with actually creating content for Tableau. When we enable them, they win, we win, everybody succeeds.
Raphael, would you like to go next?
Sure. I guess from a quantifiable aspect, we'll look at stuff like viewership of dashboards, how the analytics behind it. We'll look at how we manage our projects in certain software tools like via our sprints, and how much is getting done from an hourly perspective. But more so from a qualitative perspective, I try to ingrain in my team that we want to make sure that the stakeholders stay involved in the actual journey from birth to finish. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times we get, I don't want us as a developer team to get in that kind of, I guess you could say that gray area where you're just an order taker, and you're just trying to replicate something that's maybe already done in Excel, put it in Tableau. And I don't think there's really any value in that. And the reason I say that is because, I've noticed when we go that route and we look at viewership, viewership's down. And those are just tasks or certain things that they want to tick off their checklist from a stakeholder standpoint. But when we onboard the stakeholder, garner their expectations, have meaningful conversations with them, and have checkpoints throughout the week, we tend to see that they're invested. They're invested in the journey. They're invested in the project, and we start to get more work. We'll get more modifications, and we start to apply different phases of the actual work. And we've seen it happen where we start to become extremely busy because they start coming back to us. We have some more stuff we want you to do. And I tell my folks on my team, when your plate starts getting full, that means you're doing a good job. They want you to do more stuff, and it's not a bad thing. And then that's when I can start having meaningful resource conversations with my higher ups and say, hey, we're having a lot of work coming down the pipeline, and let's get some more folks involved. Or how can we use this as an advantage to road or demo this to other folks to see, here's what we can do.
All great points.
Yeah.
Pat?
There's so many metrics that you can put into like what's success, right? I feel like, you file that agile manifesto, right? You have your KPIs and your OKRs and like whatever metrics like you define success with, right? And, how fast you remove, what's your velocity, and like decrease churn, right? And like that's all well and good, right? The two things that I focus on, where I really take like personal success, is in the how, right? If you can avoid fire drills, right? You can come up with a plan. You can prevent burn out, right? You can stick to the strategy, right? You can deliver whatever you intended. Like that to me is the success, right? And then I think that Raf just touched on possibly the best metric, right? Which is repeat customers. Like who's coming back to you the next time that they have a problem that they have to solve, right? And sure, it can be overwhelming, right? Like the plate analogy, right? It's like, oh, I got too much going on. It's like, that's good. It's good to a point, right? But it means that people are like, oh, I got a problem. I need to solve it quick. Like I got to go to this guy. It's like, it's a good personal recognition about, how you specifically as an individual, right? Or how your team, right? Or how your product is functioning. If people are bringing work, back to you, as like a key metric of success. So those are the two that I look at.
I'd also say having a hard stance on how you're gauging your development, right? As you build a roadmap to that project, it's okay to know as a developer what your plate looks like. It's okay to know what your limitations are. It's okay to know, like, if you don't know the data set or the database you're working with, understand it's going to take a while for you to learn those metrics, to learn the data, how to grab it, what platform to go to. So it's okay to, manage or schedule 2 or 3 weeks to do something that you feel would be a lot faster if you knew the data. So having that kind of realization with yourself, your limitations, your workload, and just having a hard stance on sticking to that roadmap, that shows the stakeholders that not only do you have the development on point, but it kind of prevents them from adding more things on top of that, right? So if you get back to them and say, look what I've done, here, this, here, that, they start to pepper you with a lot of additional things to do. But if you start to have a hard stance on this, we're going to keep this as a phase one. Let's get it out to production. Let's get folks to look at it. Let's get users. Let's get some traction on this dashboard. Then at that point, you're basically setting it up for another phase 2 or a phase 3, and that in turn builds that partnership. That builds the relationship with those stakeholders.
I had a question about managing managers, but I'm gonna skip that one, Pat, because it's only really for you. So just to if you could, this is kind of a fun question. So if you could go back in time and give yourself younger self advice, what would it be? So I'm gonna ask Raf, what advice would you give your younger self?
Wow, this is a great question, and the reason I say that is I probably would say don't be afraid to take charge of your career journey. And the reason I say that is it took me a long time to realize that nothing's going to happen for me. I have to make it happen. So that was a big realization that, really I did not learn until I was probably in my 30s, to be perfectly honest. I was kind of raised on the notion that if you just keep your head down, do your work, and do a good job, then people will notice and you'll get rewarded. And yeah, that may be very well work for the workforce back when I was a kid, when my parents were working. But if you don't take real ownership and control of your journey, of your career, and say, hey, raise your hand up to tell your manager, this is what I want to do, this is what I like. If you don't do that, managers don't know. We don't know specifically that where you want to take your career. So if you don't speak up and really take ownership of where you see yourself in the future, then I can't help you or support you towards that goal.
That's great advice. Pat?
I'm going to bring up an example with your manager of managers question, right? So
Okay.
I would say slow down. Slow down, right? Because this is also directly contradictory to some other advice I give, which is like make sure that you're outside of your comfort zone. But sometimes it is best to not be so far outside of your comfort zone, right? And there was a point earlier in my career where I think I had 8 or 9 teams in 4 or 5 spots across the globe, and I was a relatively new manager, managing managers of people, and they're looking for me for advice. I don't have any advice to give them because I'm also going through this for the first time. So like Raf was saying, I think, slow down, be very deliberate in the steps that you're trying to take and like why you're trying to take them, but make sure that you can do that. There's a real possibility with how much work exists that, you raise your hand and a lot of work comes to you because you asked, and then you might have bit off more than you can chew. So just slow down. There's no rush, right? You got however long you plan on working. The work will still be here. The work will always still be here.
I would also tell myself to slow down, but I've also heard the word slow down as advice. So go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, really, what I was going to say are variations on what both of them already said. I think one thing I would go back and tell myself, especially when I first became like a non-hourly employee, right? When I first became a salaried employee, like Pat just said, the work is always going to be there. And I would say protect your passion. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's really tempting to be like, oh, I'll just work all these extra hours when no one's looking, and then I'll have all this stuff done early and I'll look so good and everyone's going to love it. And like, true, you may have a manager that appreciates it, but sort of like what I was saying before, you sort of train people how to treat you when it comes to managing your workload and what you're capable of and what you're willing to take on. And all that behavior does is lead to burnout. I've lived it so many times where it's just like, oh, I'm busting my ass to do something that maybe nobody even asked for, or like I got it in my head, I want to get this done early, or I want to do way above and beyond and do it a specific way, only for it to be like, did that really pay off? Did all of that extra time and stress really get me where I wanted to? So again, I think that's a variation of slow down, be deliberate in what you do and how you do it, and communicate what's going on. And then I would also just say to touch on something I said before, like ask for help. Like a lot of people, I think, starting off earlier in their career, especially in like tech or data, it's very tempting, or it can almost be scary to ask for help on certain things because you don't want people to think you don't know what you're doing. But like's been said, like I, as a manager, would much rather find out 5 minutes in that somebody I'm talking to has no idea what they're expected to do or the tool they need to use, whatever, than 3 months down the line, either it's not done or it's done so poorly. And now we've got, there's bigger issues afoot. So asking for help, slow down. You're not any good to anybody if you're burnout. So just, protect yourself.
All great advice. I love it. So we're pretty much at 52 minutes. Wow, I didn't think we would take up the whole hour, but I wanted to say thank you all for joining for this podcast. Is there any questions that you all want to ask each other, or?
I will just say, I let it go. I heard it earlier. My website is actually Kyle J. Massey.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure and get it out there. Because you may not know this, Kyle Massey is actually an actor who was on the Disney Channel on That's So Raven. Google him. He looks nothing like me. You would never get us confused. But
okay, Raph.
I'd like to, I guess I have another book recommendation I think you guys would like. It's called Extreme Ownership. It's by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. These guys are ex-Navy SEALs, and they apply what they've learned being Navy SEALs to business situations. So it's something it's a good read. I've read it, but I've also done the audiobook, because the audiobook is them actually, reading their own book. And one of the guys has like a man's voice. So it's like real funny to hear him kind of talk about all these like these insertions that they had in foreign countries, and then how he applies it to a business situation. So it's kind of funny, but he has a lot of great points, and now they're business consultants and they work with Fortune 500 companies. So it's a good book. It's called Extreme Ownership.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out on a Friday for this podcast, and I hope you have a great weekend. And everyone, thanks for watching.
Thanks, Dawn. Have a good one, everybody.